A man accused of stabbing a homeless man in May this year has made his first court appearance, albeit on a different docket. Manusi Mothupi was arrested last week. He was supposed to appear in the Pretoria Magistrate's Court on Friday in connection with the attempted murder of a homeless man opposite Magnolia Park in February. However, it has since emerged that the National Prosecuting Authority has declined to prosecute that case due to what they say is insufficient evidence. Now, to talk about these murders and the stalking incidents on the Gautrain, we're joined by forensic psychologist Dr Gerard Labuschange. A very good evening and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
So first of all, what we saw earlier on the court appearance on the homeless murders, what is your impression on how long it's taken to bring some kind of culprit to book?
Yeah, so obviously we don't know why the NPA at the original point in time felt it was necessary to withdraw the case. And they'll do that if they're not guaranteed of a prosecution success. So that's a very common thing. And obviously the team who was investigating the series of murders must have heard about that case and found this to be a very interesting case. So I think they're on the right track to definitely look at this individual closer. If he had an attempted murder in the same vicinity, you'd be a fool not to actually look at this individual. But it's understandable why at this point in time they're only going to charge him on that original case. So when the spokesperson said, you know, that there's nothing in this docket that says he's the serial murder suspect, well, there wouldn't be, because that's just the assault docket. So what they'll typically do is perhaps charge him for this particular case, then interview him, do thorough investigations, forensically analyze his clothing, etc., and other evidence for forensic clues that could link him to the other particular cases. And only once they've got that would they then go ahead and say, right, we're now charging him for the other cases, 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of those
To date,
cases.
how many murders do we know have actually occurred?
To my knowledge, it's 5 that have occurred since the beginning of June. The most recent one, I think, is about 10 days ago now, the last one.
Is the impression that it is the same person? Because when the homeless men who described the modus operandi of the killer, it seemed to sound the same.
Yeah, so what we would typically, when I was in the police and working on these types of cases, what we would look for is there an other number of bodies being found in a similar geographical area? We have that. This is pretty much one same street, starting with Magnolia Dell, working towards sort of the Unisa side of that street. So that's enough in terms of geographical concern. Secondly, you have the same victimology, homeless people, males, middle-aged, who are being targeted, another strong linkage factor. And then, of course, the violence that was inflicted upon them. If that is similar, again, that will be a third reason why we'd want to look at this as a series. And as we always used to say in the police, rather treat it as a series until you have evidence to the contrary. I can guarantee you these cases that are part of this task team are getting far more attention now as part of a task team than they would be getting left with individual detectives at possibly 2 or 3 different police stations.
So what would be the profile of such a suspect? Why would they target specifically homeless people? Is it because they're vulnerable, or does it speak to something deeper?
I don't think it will be enough that they were vulnerable. Otherwise, we'd have far more targeting of homeless people by serial murderers. There usually is some kind of psychological motive and reason why they focus on a particular victimology. Now, it might not be, and it probably isn't, that these 5 individuals has done anything to this particular offender. But this offender would have some reason to have a dislike for this class of victims, in the same way that others like Moses Mothupi had an anger towards black females. So he went out and searched for various victims who he could lure to the area where he's going to commit his murders. So there would be some kind of psychological motive. Ultimately, once they've caught the person, interviewed him, and he's prepared to talk about it, we'll only really know why he chose the homeless. But there will be a relevance for him.
So it would seem that it definitely is just one person so far.
Again, I think it's the most logical option at this point, and based on what we know. And again, like I said, it's safe to treat it as a series until you have the contrary, rather than not treating it as a series. And then by body 7, 8, 9, you're comfortable for whatever reasons to say it's a series, and then get the necessary resources. Then you're acting you're trying to play catch up at that point in time.
So speaking about victimology and similarities, the Gautrain stalkers, let's talk about your involvement in that and how you got involved. It came out in the Sunday Times about a month ago, I recall, but you were doing your own private investigation, is that correct?
Yeah, so it's almost by chance that this happened. I mean, last year, a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, contacted me saying, someone he knows has been harassed on the Gautrain, what do I suggest? I never spoke to that victim, but I suggested to my colleague that usually with a lot of stalking behavior, there's not a criminal act yet. So he might have more success referring this young lady to the actual Gautrain, and they probably would be much more interested in dealing with this case because it's one of their patrons. I didn't hear anything further. And then in February this year, another lady Google searched for stalking and came up with my name, saw a podcast I had done, and got hold of me and said, she's been bothered on the Gautrain. I then contacted my colleague who was in contact last year, and I said, look, how did you guys resolve that case? Maybe I can refer this new lady to whoever you spoke to, and perhaps the case can be resolved much faster by doing that. It then turned out that that previous victim hadn't gone to the Gautrain, but that person through this, my friend sent me a video and a name of this particular suspect. I then confirmed with the new lady who contacted me this year that that was the same individual. And that's how this process started. And then, of course, as later on when the first Sunday Times article came out, I think that was in March that it came out, more people started to contact me, having seen my name being mentioned in the article, to the point where now there's been 2 Sunday Times articles, I think another journalist reported on it, and we now have 14 victims of people who have been stalked since primarily... 14
victims and how many stalkers? Because
4 stalkers in total.
Wow.
So originally the main stalker, if we can call him that, is responsible for about 11 or 12 of those.
And he was operating within the Pretoria, Hatfield areas?
Well, traveling from Pretoria, Hatfield to Johannesburg. That seems to be the main route that a lot of these individuals, because the other stalkers, 2 of them were also operating on that particular route, and then another lady who was bothered actually on one of the buses from when you arrive in, I think, Rosebank or Sandton, and then take a bus further out. She was harassed on one of those. So 4 stalkers and about 14, 15 victims in total.
Was there anything common about them other than the fact that they were women?
No, that's pretty much it. Women who just, as I said, traveling between Pretoria and Johannesburg.
So, and I know you spoke to quite a few victims. I mean, quite scary, one of them speaking about how this particular stalker would make a point of not only breathing down her neck, but looking at her from underneath seats and staring at her and smiling at her in a very strange, weird, threatening manner.
So it's following behavior, sometimes standing very close to them. Some of them said it felt like he was trying to smell my hair. And then one of the more recent victims was ultimately, I took the statements for all of these victims and we handed those statements over to the Gautrain. There was a more recent victim who actually had him jump into her vehicle, follow her home in his own vehicle. On one time when she was sitting on the train, he came and sat next to her, had a bunch of files on his laps and sort of said to her, I want you to engage in certain sexual acts with her on the train. So that was the one where we really started to get towards the realm of criminal behavior. But with a lot of them, it's the following behavior. If they would move to a different carriage, he would get on and follow them.
So what would be the motive or the intent of the stalkers?
We think with this particular individual, the main stalker now, who does have a previous conviction for a sexual offence, it is a sexually motivated thing. Otherwise, he would be targeting
as in it
men.
could have escalated to something more violent?
Yeah, so he's ran after them. Some of them, when they're going to their vehicle, he runs after them, and then when confronted, he sort of backs off. So the concern that I had, specifically when I was contacted by the victim earlier in February, was this year, that over the period of time this was happening, there was an escalation of his behavior in how aggressive, not physically aggressive, but more sort of approaching he was towards these victims, and not just sort of being inappropriate on the train system, as I said, following them to their vehicles. And then later on we found he'd actually jumped into the vehicle.
And I see there's an exclusive books employee who actually says this stalker followed her inside Sandton City. So it's quite a brazen following.
Yeah, I mean, 2 of them, I think, reported that he followed them to their house. He would follow them in his vehicle while they were driving off home. So that's why, again, it's very concerning behavior from a threat assessment point of view that this person, and of course we're now suddenly getting an idea of the full extent of this person's operation. And these people have been operating, I think, pretty much since 2017, 2018.
So you acquired a written confession or affidavit from one of them saying that he will desist from doing so, and Gautrain seemed to be rather concerned on why you were involved or how you curated that conversation. Why is that? Did they feel you were stepping on their toes?
Well, essentially by the point in time when the Sunday Times article come out, Gautrain had basically said they're not going to do anything to this guy. The victims just open up protection orders and open up criminal cases. Unfortunately, some of the victims had tried to do that and were unsuccessful. So at that point, Gautrain was no longer talking to me, and that's their choice. But at the time that the article came out, because my name was mentioned in it, the suspect actually, I suppose you could say, stalked me and tracked me down and phoned me. And he didn't admit that he admitted that he was the person referred to in the article, but not that he'd ever stalked someone. And he said it was a misunderstanding. He said it was a misunderstanding. He's very friendly and chats to lots of people. Now, this was before a lot of the concerning sexual behaviors came out from subsequent victims who read that article and contacted me. So that was sort of his, and he said, but to make everybody feel comfortable, I'll give you a guarantee that I won't use the train, just to show that I'm happy to accommodate individuals.
So he's not the main stalker. He's
so
just
that was the person who stalked the most victims. So he was the main stalker. who had at that point, as I said, well, now we know he was responsible for about 12 of the victims. And he agreed that he wouldn't. There was no conditions. He just said, I will not use the train. I said, great.
Has he kept his word?
He has. There was one day when he did, and a victim saw him, contacted me, I contacted him, and he said, yes, his vehicle had broken down, but he's taking leave and he's going to fix his vehicle the next week.
How did he explain his behavior if he felt that there was nothing threatening or criminal about his behavior?
He said he just likes to approach people and talk to them. He's very friendly. You know, you're using a common space on the train. So as I said, at that point, we only had 4 victims that were his, so to speak. A lot of the more concerning victims' behavior came out after they'd read the story.
So none were physically hurt?
With those initial 4. So at that point in time, there wasn't criminal behavior. It was just the inappropriate following and fear-inducing behavior. So he signed the agreement saying that he promises not to use the train just to make everybody feel safe. I then forwarded that on to Gautrain.
Dr. Labuschange, final question. What would you advise women who find themselves in these situations to do? Because I saw one of the victims said she approached the guard and the guard said, well, he's probably just trying to be nice, go out on a date with you, why don't you give him a chance? And which could be quite scary if you are feeling threatened.
Yeah, so 2 of the victims did approach guards, the one that you mentioned and another one who said, look, I was crying and in tears and told the guard what was happening. So I think there's a problem is we don't necessarily train people who are there for more traditional security guard reasons to deal with these types of behavior. So an organization really has to, from top to bottom, train its staff to know that this is a huge problematic behavior, but you also have to make it known to your trained commuters that this is who you must contact immediately when you have this happening. The commuters, a lot of them felt, I'm too scared to tell anybody, what do I do, should I tell anybody, who do I tell? As I said, some went to guards. So you really as an organization need to have WhatsApp numbers, hotlines that people can contact and respond immediately. That's the best scenario.
Thank you very much for joining us. That there is Dr. Gerard Labuschange. He is a forensic psychologist, and that brings us to a little before 12:30. So let's take you back to Francis now.